Welcome to the TLGS 2024 conference. My name is Elaine Walker from the University of Alabama, and I'll be moderating today's presentation and collecting questions in the chat to address at the end of the presentation. So now I'm going to turn it over to our presenter who will discuss supporting graduate students conducting human subject research.
Thank you so much, Elaine. Can you hear me okay? Great. So thank you again. I'm so happy to be here. This morning has been fantastic, and I think that supporting graduate students conducting human subject research is a very important function that libraries are doing a lot more activities around. And I think that the University of Kansas presentation on AI this morning and Duke's great presentation just now on their graduate academy really feeds into what I'm going to talk about. So this is a really nice segue. Just to get started real quick, my name is J. Marie Bravent, and I am a library faculty member at the University of Kentucky Special Collections Research Center. I'm a public historian, I'm a certified archivist and educator. I've been teaching with primary sources for over 20 years, and I've served in numerous types of positions in academic libraries and archives and museums during my career. And I'm currently serving as a graduate outreach and teaching archivist. I'm a member of the Non-Medical Institutional Review Board, and I've been on that board since 2021. And starting this year, I will take on an appointment as vice chair of our Non-Medical Institutional Review Board. So I'm coming at this topic of supporting graduate students doing human subject research from multiple perspectives. I conducted human subject research when I was a graduate student in the public history program that I was in, and it was a little controversial in my department at the time. So I experienced some of that being actually in that seat as a graduate student. I've conducted research as a professional in my own work, and now on the board reviewing protocols, I have these multiple perspectives. So I hope that really helps with what I'm able to share with you all today and how you can replicate some of these support services at your institution. So this is a dense subject, just like any type of scholarship. Things are shifting. AI and data privacy and new laws nationally, internationally, and guidance around lots of these factors are constantly changing. So there's a lot of text on my slides that I'm seeing as a resource that you can come back to. And I'm going to go through a lot of this very quickly at the beginning because I really want to spend time talking about how this can be part of library services. So we'll real quick kind of talk about how you can identify human subject research and when a project qualifies under that category, the differences between an exclusion and exempt research studies, and then articulating the roles that librarians can play and archivists can play in this, and then how we can support graduate students better. So just a little background, ethical review is based in many of the ethical codes that I'm sure many of you have heard about and are familiar with that developed over the 20th century to protect research participants and subjects from some of the not so ethical practices that had been going on. And again, everybody's familiar with a lot of these studies that were not done well and didn't serve the public in a positive way. So in the United States, we are mostly dealing with the Common Rule, which was revised in 2018, and they are continuing to release new guidance about those revisions through this year. So the Common Rule, which you'll see referred to often as Federal Code 45 CFR 46, it's been taken on by 20 different federal agencies. And so research in all fields are possibly subject to these different federal regulations. The Common Rule establishes the institutional review boards and governs their purview and establishes the ethics rules for both behavioral and biomedical research in the United States. And that's important, behavioral research. So the social sciences and the humanities still need to go through human subject research protocol review, just like the sciences, the STEM fields, and medical research. So human subject research is a systematic investigation using a scientific method to develop or contribute to generalizable knowledge. Are you going to publish your findings? Then it's probably research. There are, of course, exceptions and exclusions related to that, but in general, if you're doing any sort of systematic investigation, it counts as research. And then if that research involves living individuals or gathering information through interaction or intervention with living individuals, and you're going to use that data that you collect to analyze a topic and then present your findings, then you're doing human subject research. So graduate students trying to figure out if their research project, their thesis or their dissertation qualifies as human subject research might need to sit down with you and kind of talk through whether what they're doing meets these requirements. These are this is the text of the specific definitions just for reference later. So the IRB, the Institutional Review Board, is the federally mandated body that is responsible at your institution for ensuring that these regulations and rules are being applied and that research is being conducted ethically. IRB's primary role is to ensure that the proper safeguards are in place for the welfare, rights, and privacy of human subjects enrolled in research studies. And one of the important things I want to point out, we're all at different institutions, and every IRB is going to be different. The rules and the regulations apply to everyone equally, but the way that that internal policy and the procedures are developed at each institution is going to vary. You're going to have chairs and vice chairs of each institutional review board. There's going to be medical and non-medical review boards, appointed members. The staff of the research office are incredibly important. They are your best friend. Getting the graduate students to understand that you should talk to them, ask questions, rely on them for advice is incredibly important. There's also going to be a number of consultants that will be part of the review process, and then community representatives, people who aren't associated with the university, they don't have appointments as faculty or staff, they're just community representatives from the area, are also on the institutional review board as stakeholders. And it's important for students to understand that process as well. So the types of IRB review, there are many. It can be complicated, but one of the ones I really want to point out, first of all, is a not human research determination is important sometimes for graduate students who aren't sure. Maybe their topic kind of rides the line between human subject research. Is it evaluation? Are they doing a quality improvement activity? Sometimes the beginning of the research phase may be quality improvement, and then they move into research later on. So having a non-human research determination, which is a form that you fill out and then a certification from the IRB office saying, this isn't human subject research, you can proceed, can be really important for graduate students. Second is the exempt protocol. And this is a major misconception and misunderstanding generally. Exempt is a category of review, not exemption from review. And I think you hear a lot of faculty telling graduate students, oh, your thesis is exempt, or, this type of research that you're doing is low risk, so it's exempt. So you don't have to do an IRB review. That is not correct. An IRB review is still required. And what you receive at the end of that review is an exemption certification, which means you can proceed with your research and you don't have to check back in with the IRB and do a lot of the additional requirements that go along with a full reviewed protocol. You still have to submit a modification request if you change your research substantially, but generally exemption and exempt review with your certification is where that ends. That is a big part of my advocacy on this topic, is getting folks to understand that you are doing human subject research and exemption is a process and a review point. So to just quickly to review, the three core principles of the common rule and the concept of conducting ethical research focus on respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. And as many of us have already been talking about this morning, justice and beneficence and respect for persons, it has never been more important, especially in a climate with AI, identity theft, data being used in social media, all of the different ways that our identities and our personal information can be scraped and used and repurposed without our informed consent. That is a major factor in international laws that are being passed right now. And with all those frameworks shifting and changing, making sure graduate students know that their research should be reviewed by this peer review body as part of their institution is important. And knowing that nobody's saying, you're not doing ethical research unless you have it reviewed. Of course, everybody's wanting to be ethical and applying justice to their processes, but there's a lot of details in these regulations that you're going to want to walk through that process with somebody who's really embedded in those regulations and work with your IRB. We're a partner to graduate students. The research office is a partner to faculty and graduate students, and getting folks to see this as a way to really ensure that you're going about everything methodically and that you've checked all the boxes is important. And of course, respecting your research participants. They're there voluntarily. They're also partners in your research. And thinking of your participants as partners in your research is important, especially for informed consent. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So need to know, what do graduate students really need to know at the beginning of this process? First and foremost, especially if they're the primary investigator on their own thesis, research, dissertation topic, they are responsible for all of the study procedures, for following the regulations, the policy, for doing all of the reporting, and for supervising any personnel that they might have. Now, their faculty advisor is probably going to be listed as study personnel, but they're advisory. The PI is the person who's really responsible. So understanding, for a graduate student to understand when they take on that role, that's a big step in becoming a scholar, being a junior scholar, and embracing, to sort of reiterate with the folks at Duke talked about, that agency in their own research. This is a big step, and it's an important one, and it's empowering. And even though it can be a little bit scary and tedious, having professionals in the library to also help walk them through is important. And then understanding what a research protocol really is, and the different parts, how it details your research plan, outlines all the procedures. It explains how you're going to meet those ethical requirements. And then one of the ones that I usually when I talk to graduate students and even junior faculty, you have to have the final copy of your study materials and documents included, which means you have to be pretty far along in your planning process when you submit for ethical review. So that tends to be a little scary sometimes, I think, for graduate students. So one of the things that's important for them to remember is they need to have it as close to final as they can get it, but they can always come back and do a modification if they need to make changes before they start their research. Or even if they're in the middle of their research project and they realize, well, this just isn't working, I'm not getting the recruitment I need, the survey's too long, they can make adjustments, submit a modification, get it reviewed, and then restart their research. That working with an IRB is not the end all be all. You have to have it perfect or else it's not going to get approved. We want to be in a conversation with the researchers and in that process with them. And we're here to make sure that the research is done and it's done well, and we want it to work for the PI. And so it's important to reiterate that with folks that we're providing reference support to in the library. Real quick, the parts of a protocol. I'm not going to go into too many details on this, but one of the things that I often, when I've sat down with graduate students to talk about, are the different steps and having them think through all of these things from the beginning. And one of the most important, of course, is the informed consent part. The key information elements, the key elements were part of what was revised in 2018. They were simplified a little bit, but they're also more specific. So if their faculty advisor hasn't done a protocol since before the pandemic, some of these changes might be new to everyone involved in the process. So sitting down and kind of working through that can be an important step. And then also looking at software, hardware, retention, archiving. There are a lot of factors as parts of these that people in the library, depending on how your institution is organized and where data research services lives, or where certain if you have a creative scholarship center and a database within your library system where the graduate students can deposit their materials, or a Dataverse system, different ways that the library can participate in helping with the data plan as well. So real quick, informed consent, again, is the most important part of the process. And that's where I like to tell graduate students, this is where you should really focus your time and your energy and think through. Basically, you're going to sit down and in a document form, have a conversation with one of your study participants. And then eventually, when you're with your study participant, you're going to have that conversation, and you're going to make sure that they understand exactly what they're agreeing to and all of the different steps and parts and pieces to what's going to happen with their information, their data, what their rights are, what are the risks and benefits to participating in the study. And it doesn't matter if it's a quick online survey about their opinions on, a very simple issue, or if you're asking about suicidal ideation or serious mental health issues or diet and diabetes. Just because we're on the non-medical institutional review board doesn't mean that we don't review protocols from all different areas, such as kinesiology, psychology, areas that still touch on medical information. So making sure that students have thought through what the actual risks are to asking these questions. Just because something's uncomfortable doesn't mean that it's risky. You can ask questions that would be, the kind of questions you might have in a normal conversation throughout the day that, we talk about politics, we might talk about healthcare, and occasionally they might be uncomfortable. That doesn't mean that it creates risk, but you want to tell your participants, I'm going to ask questions about X, Y, and Z, so they know what they're getting into ahead of time. And then making sure that the contact information and the role of the PI is included. Even though you're a graduate student, you want to say, I'm a doctoral student at XY University, and this is my research project. And you're taking that level of responsibility as a graduate student. And one of my favorite parts about working with this is that there's so many different ways to do informed consent now, especially with the pandemic. Things move forward very quickly, and there's a lot less paper and a lot more digital opportunities and cover letters with waiver of signatures and an assent or I consent button process online. Doing Zoom interviews has really forwarded the ability to do human subject research. So in a weird way, the pandemic kind of made doing this easier, and you can get to a larger audience now. And so graduate students might be starting to think about doing research in different ways than their advisors did, maybe just 5 years ago. And that's a really important aspect of what librarians can contribute to the support conversation. So why do all of this? A graduate student might come to you and just be exasperated, not knowing where to start. So it's important to kind of talk about where the human subject research process kind of plays into the larger picture of scholarship. It's really important to go through the ethics review process as a learning experience. You're required to think through every aspect of your study from beginning to end before you get started, and it's all laid out for you. And once you get to the end of that planning process, your study will just go along very smoothly, and you're not trying to muddle through doing your research and learning how to do the methodology and the process while you're working with participants. It's a much cleaner way and very professional way to conduct research. And once graduate students trying to get into the process and they understand all of that work that they put in ahead of time really does pay off. What was a frustrating and sometimes slightly stressful process is suddenly very rewarding. And so I like to point that out. Contributing your research findings, publishing, contributing to generalized public knowledge is very rewarding, and it makes your research better. And whether you have to go through review or not, you still have to follow these ethical practices, even if you have a non-human subject determination. And having this review, having that IRB stamp gives you legitimacy. It amplifies your professional voice. It shows that you have been vetted through multiple peer review processes. And ethics review is just another peer review process. And publishing entities, of course, more and more, as we've seen, are asking for your IRB certification and your approval documents before publishing. Even in fields where human subject research hasn't in the past been as prominent, we've seen retractions and data issues coming through. So this is just going to be, it's accelerating. It's just going to be required more and more. So getting graduate students used to that is important. And this is a transferable skill. Once you've written your ethics review protocol, you have a grant proposal, you have an abstract for your dissertation. So much of this overlaps with the rest of the scholarly work that you're doing, and if you go into government, if you go into the nonprofit sector, these skills are going to be just as important. Those entities have to have IRBs as well, not just universities. And then, of course, you're protecting yourself and the institution from any issues of liability later on. So conducting a consultation, a human subject research reference interview specifically, how to go about that. So first of all, I like to just listen to students and find out where they are in their journey, their educational journey, where they are in their degree program, and kind of listen to what support they've already gotten, how their relationship with different different offices at the university are already existing, and who else they might need to reach out to, and listen to some of the challenges. And these are some things that I've heard when I've been working with folks. We have a huge transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary push on our campus right now. And so graduate students are doing interdisciplinary research. not just for the first time research in their own field, but they're working in a good, to collaborate with other students and other PIs in other fields, and that can be complicated. And so kind of knowing where to start with that. They might be in a department or field where human subject research has not been common, where I get protocols on music, dance, art, anthropology, different fields where these types of processes were not really common for researchers maybe just 5 to 10 years ago. And that's really exciting. They might be collaborating with folks from other institutions, which kicks some different additional regulations into play. So that's important. They might have a faculty advisor who's new to the university, not familiar with the policies yet, and they need a little extra help. They might have an advisor who's never done their own human subject research. And they might occasionally still run into faculty who have some philosophical differences, concerns about ethical review, impeding academic freedom, or just folks that just don't want to deal with it at all and discourage their students from participating or pursuing the types of projects that would require review. And so sometimes students might need a little extra support and saying, no, this is your research, this is your project. If you want to go through this process, we'll help you as well. That they might need that little bit of extra mentorship that sometimes librarians can provide where we're sort of removed from the grading process and, that we're not on their dissertation committee kind of thing. So these are the steps that I like to go through. It's similar to a reference interview that might be conducted for other topics, but it's something that can be adapted in many different ways. So first, I like to ask just general questions about the research topic, and I like to ask them in a way that mirrors how they're going to eventually write that protocol. And I'm going to include a PDF that it has way too much text to be a PowerPoint slide right now, but I'll attach that to the final one on some of these sample questions and examples. And then I like to repeat back what they've said to me, but use protocol language to kind of get them to start thinking in the ways that a protocol review might be structured. So I might say, so I'm hearing that you're going to have a study population of adults between the ages of 18 and 25. And they might have told me I'm going to interview some of my friends from the class that I'm in. So I'm hearing that you're going to do an online TED question survey as part of your methodology. That's the section you're going to explain that in your protocol. You're going to use online snowball recruitment method. Explain to them what that is, give them a link. So they start to understand that there are terms and definitions for the things they're already thinking about that they might not know about quite yet, and how to apply that to the description that they're going to write. And then I like to refer and suggest. The idea is to listen for where they might already know exactly what they're doing over here with their methodology, but need some help with some of the data language or retention information. So listen to where they need some help and kind of focus my attention on that. Give them some examples, talk through some options, guide them to find their own answers and solutions. Research is a creative process. Allow them to go through that process. Give them references. We have an incredible research integrity office with an amazing amount of training. Our graduate school does a lot of training. Our Center for Teaching and Learning does a lot of training in these areas. So referring them to these resources that already exist. And then I like to send a follow-up email, kind of repeat what we talked about, send them the links to the items that we talked about, and make sure that they know I'm there as support going forward. And then I like to encourage, just provide that extra, this is just another peer review process. This is what's going to make you, a scholar, give you that research excellence. It's going to pay off later. Just give them those encouraging words at the end to make sure that they know everybody's got to go through this. It's not just a bureaucratic process. It's really important. And then this is another question I get a lot. Why can't I just copy a template? Everybody's doing these. Everybody's submitting protocols. Why can't I just download, an example and then use that for mine? Well, that's not how it's supposed to work. Every research project should be unique. It's a creative process, and the IRB is not there to dictate what your research needs to be or to put parameters or, prescribe the exact text that needs to be used. While there are things that need to be specifically addressed, there are lots of different ways to do that. And so you may or may not have at your institution specific templates, and this may be why they might not be as available, or they might not be as detailed as students might be looking for. This is an example timeline of going through the process. I just want to point out that the review can take anywhere from 2 weeks to maybe up to 2 to 4 months, depending on your IRB, the type of review that the student's going through. And that can be really important. And then understanding some of their responsibilities later down the road, and how to close a protocol is also important. And I put this in there. I don't know how easy it is to see, but this is an example. I took a screenshot from my internal system of how long it took and all the different steps within the system that a PI went through from initial submission to the final approval. This is a seasoned researcher who has done numerous protocols. They submitted it initially in November and it wasn't approved until the end of February. That's normal. And so students, graduate students in particular, if they're on a clock and they've got a timeline for graduating, they need to understand that this is going to be part of, they can't start their research until they've got this done. So looking at the different parts and pieces, you can see that multiple reviewers were assigned in early December. That's because this protocol required a FERPA reviewer and an AI reviewer. On our campus, we have a pretty robust AI working group, and we now have AI reviewers who will look at protocols for the IRB. We often get cultural consultants. A lot of protocols, especially if they're online, will have international participants, and so that requires a whole additional level of data privacy and requirements. So what can my library do? These are some things I would suggest if you're not already doing some of this, kind of working through building these support services for graduate students, having a designated human subject research expert in your library. It could be a liaison, it could be a team of people, it could be somebody who has interest or expertise and can be that go-to person for changes and bringing information back to the library. Developing a really strong relationship with the research office staff. Those folks are your best friends, and working with them as peers is really important, and especially getting graduate students to understand that that should be part of the process. Keep up with your training. We talked about responsible conduct of research training that's required, making sure that graduate students know that, and that they work through, and encouraging them to take those, offering those in the library is very important. Being a sponsor for graduate students, doing practicums and having them go through this process in the library as part of their work. Information science students should be doing these things too. Get involved, participate in your own human subject research as part of your own work. And one of my favorite, volunteer to be on your institutional review board. It has been, I must say, one of the most rewarding parts of my career. I enjoy it. I get to see the research process and projects before when they're being created. I get to see the scope of research that's going on our campus at a level that I didn't know before, and we've been able to adjust our services in the library based on the types of protocols that we're seeing coming through. I can't share those details as an IRB member, but I can kind of come back with information to the library and say, hey, maybe we should get some resources over here, or look at this database and expand what we're doing because of projects coming down the line. And it's great because you'll see those researchers splashed on the campus newsletter a couple weeks later. This major research project is underway, and it's a very rewarding process. So with that, I think that is everything that I have to share. So I'd love to hear some questions, and please feel free to get in touch with me later on if after the conference, if you have any questions about this. I'm looking at the chat to see if there are questions.
Questions come through. We had a good statement from Wendy, though, about having faculty oversight for IRBs. I did, for the sake of time, everyone, if you do have questions that come up, I know sometimes it's hard to think of them on the spot. Jay Marie, if you could drop your email into the chat, maybe people can reach out to you via email if they have anything.
Absolutely.
I did have one question. Could you sort of touch on, again, very briefly, just where in the research process they should be before they submit their IRB approval? I know you mentioned that they should be pretty well along, like maybe having an established methodology. Could you touch a little bit more on that?
Yes, so it should be the last thing they do before they start their research.
Yeah.
So usually the semester before they're going to do their research project, we would suggest here, they've got their abstract. They've probably got a committee perhaps underway, depending on the discipline in the field. So we would say, submit it in August or September, maybe October at the latest, if you're going to start your research in January for spring term.
Okay, thank you. And I have one question from Elizabeth. How have your library services adjusted to support the need for helping students with their IRB approvals?
Yeah, so we're kind of in the middle of creating new liaison teams. Our library has been shifting services over the last couple of years through some reorganization. We've hired a data services librarian. We have an open educational resources librarian. I've been doing this for the last couple of years, and we're working on creating a Canvas course that specifically focuses on graduate student academic support. So we're kind of in the process of developing these tools and moving in a direction where we can be supporting that in the library. I think there's a lot that we can do, and it's been great to hear some of the other ideas here at the conference as well, that can allow the library to really participate more in this process. And I think you're right. There's a lot of misunderstanding about this. I'll just comment on the non-compliance. We get protocol violations all the time where students just didn't know, or they got bad advice from their faculty member. And our job is to get compliance and to make sure everybody's in a good state. It's not to penalize a student for making a mistake. So students get really nervous, and working with the IRB, we're there to help. We're not there to penalize. I think that's important to reinforce.
Thank you so much.